If you clicked on this video, you're experiencing something you can't quite explain. Not déjà vu exactly, not regular memory. Something deeper, stranger, more profound. You're remembering things you never learned, knowing information you never studied, feeling certainty about subjects you've never explored. And instead of dismissing this as imagination or confabulation, part of you recognizes this is real. This is memory, but not memory from this lifetime's experiences. Memory from quantum field itself, from accumulated consciousness, from collective knowing, from information encoded at level beyond individual brains' storage capacity. There's a phenomenon quantum physics predicts, but mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. Consciousness doesn't just store memory in neurons. Consciousness accesses memory from quantum field, where all information that's ever been known by any consciousness exists simultaneously. This field isn't metaphorical. It's predicted by quantum mechanics as information field that exists beneath physical reality, where everything that's occurred, everything that's been learned, everything that's been understood remains permanently encoded. Mystics called it Akashic records. Quantum physics calls it quantum information field. Different names for same phenomenon. Universal memory bank accessible to consciousness that develops capacity to interface with it. Your quantum memory is unlocking. That's why you're here. That's why these words found you. Something in your consciousness has reached developmental stage where access to quantum field memory becomes possible. And that access manifests as exactly what you've been experiencing. Sudden knowing without apparent source, unexpected expertise without training, profound understanding without study. You're not imagining it. You're not making it up. You're accessing information that exists in quantum field and that your expanding consciousness can now perceive. Can you feel the validation in recognizing this? That relief of, I'm not crazy, this is real. That's consciousness touching truth about its own nature. You're not limited to memory stored in your individual brain. You're quantum being with access to universal memory field containing everything that's ever been known. And that access is activating now, not randomly, not by accident, but because consciousness has evolved to point where quantum memory becomes accessible. Quantum entanglement proves information isn't local. When particles become entangled, they share information instantaneously regardless of distance. No signal travels between them, yet they remain correlated. This demonstrates information exists non-locally at quantum level. Consciousness works the same way. Your awareness isn't trapped in your skull, accessing only memories stored in neurons. Your awareness is quantum phenomenon that can interface with non-local information field where all memory exists simultaneously. Individual brain is receiver, not source. And when receiver develops sufficiently, it can tune to frequencies where quantum memory becomes accessible. The signs that quantum memory is unlocking are specific, recognizable, and distinguish this phenomenon from regular memory recall or learned knowledge. You're experiencing some or all of these signs right now, and recognizing them validates what's happening rather than leaving you confused about increasingly frequent instances of knowing things you shouldn't know, remembering things you never experienced, understanding concepts you never studied. Take a breath. Deep one, because what comes next explains what's actually happening in your consciousness. Why quantum memory unlocks at specific developmental stages, what signs confirm you're accessing field rather than creating fantasy, and how to consciously develop this capacity rather than experiencing it randomly as confusing anomaly. You're not losing your grip on reality. You're expanding your grip to include quantum reality that exists beneath surface-level experience culture taught you was the only reality. Before identifying specific signs that quantum memory is unlocking, you need to understand what quantum memory actually is and how it differs from regular biological memory. Because mainstream neuroscience says memory is stored in brain. Synaptic connections created through experience, strengthened through repetition, accessed through neural activation. This explains most memory, but it doesn't explain memory that has no source in personal experience, no basis in learned information, no connection to anything you've encountered in current lifetime. Quantum memory is information accessed from field rather than retrieved from brain. The field exists at quantum level beneath physical reality, where information isn't lost or degraded over time, where everything that's been known by any consciousness remains permanently encoded, where boundaries between individual minds dissolve and all knowing becomes accessible to consciousness developed enough to perceive it. This isn't mystical speculation. This is quantum information theory applied to consciousness. Quantum mechanics demonstrates information cannot be destroyed, only transformed. When particle changes state, information about previous state isn't lost. It's encoded in quantum field as correlation that persists even after physical manifestation changes. Applied to consciousness, this means information gained through any consciousness's experience doesn't disappear when that individual dies. Information persists in quantum field, remaining accessible to any consciousness that develops capacity to interface with field at level where that information exists. The Akashic records that mystics describe are quantum field from consciousness perspective, not library in sky, not mystical dimension separate from reality, but actual information field predicted by quantum physics, containing everything that's ever occurred, ever been known, ever been understood, accessible through consciousness reaching sufficient development to tune to frequencies where that information exists. Ancient seers accessed this field through altered states, but increasingly, ordinary consciousness is developing capacity to access field during normal waking awareness. What triggers quantum memory unlocking isn't training or technique, it's consciousness evolution. When awareness expands beyond identification with individual ego, when consciousness recognizes its quantum nature, when boundaries that seem to separate your mind from universal mind begin dissolving, access to quantum field memory naturally emerges, not as special psychic ability, as natural capacity of quantum consciousness that becomes available when development reaches certain threshold. The memory accessed through quantum field differs qualitatively from brain-based memory. Brain memory feels familiar. You remember experiencing or learning the information. Quantum memory feels sudden. Information appears complete without source you can identify. Brain memory is personal, connected to your life, your experiences, your learning. Quantum memory is transpersonal. Information about things you've never personally encountered, but that exist in collective field. Brain memory is temporal. You remember when and where you learned it. Quantum memory is atemporal. Information appears without temporal context, as if you've always known it, but just became conscious of knowing. Recognizing this distinction is crucial. If you're dismissing quantum memory as false memory, as imagination, as making things up, you're missing evolutionary development occurring in your consciousness. You're not creating information. You're accessing information from field, not from your brain storage, but from quantum field's universal storage. The capacity to access that field is what's unlocking, and that unlocking manifests through specific recognizable signs that distinguish quantum memory access from other mental phenomena. There are specific signs confirming quantum memory is unlocking rather than experiencing false memory, imagination, or psychological phenomenon. These signs aren't subtle. They're operating in your direct experience if unlocking has begun. And recognizing them validates what's happening while helping you distinguish genuine quantum access from mind, creating stories to fill gaps in knowledge. The first sign is knowing without learning. Information appears in your awareness complete and detailed without you having studied it. Not vague sense or general idea, specific knowledge about subject you've never formally explored. You can speak about topic with unexpected expertise. You understand concepts without having read explanations. You have working knowledge that should require study but appeared without study. This isn't savant syndrome or photographic memory of information encountered. This is knowing that has no source in your personal history, yet exists clearly in your awareness. The second sign is sudden expertise in unexpected areas. You discover you can do something you never learned, speak about subject with authority, perform skill without practice, understand complex system without training. The expertise isn't complete mastery, but it's far beyond beginner level that should exist without learning. And when you apply this unexpected expertise, it proves accurate. The knowledge works, the skill functions, the understanding holds up when tested. This suggests consciousness is accessing information from quantum field where that expertise exists, downloading it into awareness without going through normal learning process. The third sign is recognition rather than discovery. When you encounter certain information, teaching, or concept, you don't feel like you're learning something new. You feel like you're remembering something you already knew but had forgotten. The recognition is immediate, profound, certain. Not, "This makes sense, but I already knew this." That recognition feeling is consciousness detecting that information matches what already exists in quantum memory. Brain might not have stored it, but quantum consciousness accessed it, and now external information triggers recognition of what was already known at quantum level. The fourth sign is dreams containing detailed information you never learned, not random dream imagery or symbolic processing, but dreams where you're learning, experiencing, or teaching information that proves accurate when you wake. Dreams where you receive instruction about subject you've never studied. Dreams where you access memories that don't belong to your personal history but feel absolutely real. These dreams are consciousness accessing quantum field during sleep when critical mind's filters are offline, allowing information to flow more freely from field into awareness. The fifth sign is spontaneous speaking or writing beyond your knowledge. You're explaining something and information flows that you didn't consciously know. You're writing and concepts emerge that surprise you with their depth. Your teaching and understanding articulates itself through you that exceeds what you thought you understood. This flow state where information emerges from beyond conscious knowing is consciousness channeling from quantum field, allowing field's information to express through you rather than trying to consciously retrieve what brain has stored. The sixth sign is past lifelike memories with verifiable details. Memories appear that seem to be from different time, different place, different life, but they contain specific, accurate details you couldn't possibly know, not vague feelings about past lives. Detailed memories that, when researched, prove accurate about historical facts, locations, languages, customs you never studied. These aren't reincarnation memories necessarily. These are quantum field memories where consciousness is accessing information about past experiences encoded in field, experiencing them as if they were personal memories because consciousness is perceiving from quantum level where all experience is accessible. The seventh sign is immediate understanding of advanced concepts. You encounter complex idea that should require extensive background to comprehend. Philosophical concept, scientific principle, spiritual teaching, and you understand it immediately at depth that normally requires years of study. The understanding isn't intellectual grasp of words, it's direct knowing of what concept points toward. This immediate comprehension suggests consciousness is accessing understanding from quantum field where someone has already developed that understanding and you're perceiving their achievement rather than recreating it through personal learning process. Write in comments which signs you're experiencing. Just list them. Knowing without learning, or sudden expertise, or recognition feeling. That acknowledgement validates what's happening, makes conscious what consciousness might be dismissing. tells quantum field that yes, you're receiving the access. Yes, you recognize it's real. Yes, you're ready to develop this capacity consciously rather than experiencing it as random, confusing phenomenon. Now we arrive at why quantum memory unlocks specifically now in your development and not earlier. Because access to quantum field isn't random gift granted to lucky few. Access emerges at specific stage of consciousness evolution that you've reached, and understanding what triggered unlocking reveals what's required to develop capacity further, rather than experiencing sporadic access you can't control or understand. The first trigger is ego dissolution. As long as consciousness is strongly identified with individual separate self, quantum field remains inaccessible. Ego creates boundaries. This is me, that is other. And those boundaries block perception of information that exists beyond individual mind. But when ego begins dissolving, when consciousness recognizes it's not separate individual but quantum awareness, temporarily experiencing individual perspective, boundaries thin. And through thinned boundaries, information from quantum field begins seeping into conscious awareness. The second trigger is frequency elevation. Quantum field exists at specific frequencies. Individual brain-based consciousness operates at different frequencies. As consciousness evolves, as awareness expands, as you engage spiritual practices or transformative experiences, consciousness's frequency rises. When frequency reaches threshold, where it matches quantum field frequencies, access naturally opens. Not through trying to access field, through consciousness naturally tuning to frequencies where field information becomes perceptible. The third trigger is activation through crisis or breakthrough. Major life disruption, death of someone close, health emergency, relationship ending, career collapse, spiritual awakening can trigger sudden quantum memory access. The disruption shatters normal consciousness patterns, creates temporary opening in boundaries that usually filter perception, allows quantum information to flood into awareness. After crisis stabilizes, access might reduce, but consciousness has tasted quantum memory and knows it exists, making deliberate development possible. The fourth trigger is specific age developmental stage. Consciousness evolves through predictable stages across lifespan. Certain stages naturally involve thinning of boundaries between individual mind and universal mind. Midlife often triggers quantum memory access as consciousness questions identity built in first half of life and opens to larger awareness. Elder years can activate access as consciousness prepares for transition beyond physical form. Each stage has quantum openings where field becomes more accessible than during other developmental periods. The fifth trigger is lineage activation. Some people carry genetic or karmic propensity for quantum field access that activates when conditions align. Not special privilege, more like inherited sensitivity that makes field access easier once consciousness reaches appropriate development. If ancestors accessed quantum memory, if soul carried capacity from previous experiences, activation can occur more readily when current lifetime consciousness reaches readiness. The capacity was always potential. Life circumstances create conditions where potential actualizes. The sixth trigger is collective field shift. Right now, in this period of human history, collective consciousness is evolving rapidly. Old paradigms collapsing, new awareness emerging, species-wide frequency elevation occurring. This collective shift makes quantum memory access easier for individuals whose personal development aligns with collective evolution. You're benefiting from collective field that's more conducive to quantum access than field was for previous generations. What was rare mystical capacity is becoming more common natural development. Understanding these triggers explains why unlocking is occurring now. Something shifted, ego dissolved enough, frequency elevated sufficiently, crisis created opening, developmental stage arrived, lineage activated, or collective field-supported individual readiness. The unlocking isn't random. It's a natural result of consciousness reaching point where quantum memory becomes accessible, and recognizing what triggered access reveals how to support further development rather than experiencing sporadic access you can't predict or control. 7 years ago, my quantum memory unlocked during meditation retreat. I wasn't seeking access, wasn't trying to develop psychic abilities or remember past lives. I was just sitting, breathing, watching mind. And suddenly, information flooded in. Complete detailed knowledge about ancient philosophy I'd never studied. Understanding of languages I'd never learned. Memories of places I'd never visited but could describe with precision. The flood was overwhelming, disorienting, impossible to explain through anything I'd been taught about how mind works. At first, I dismissed it as imagination running wild during extended meditation. Tried to ignore information pouring in, attempted to return to simple breath awareness. But information kept flowing, and when retreat ended and I researched what I'd remembered, specific details about ancient texts, precise descriptions of historical locations, accurate understanding of philosophical concepts, everything verified. I hadn't imagined it. I'd accessed real information that existed in quantum field and that my expanding consciousness could now perceive. That initial flooding lasted weeks, then gradually stabilized into more manageable access. Instead of overwhelming influx, information appeared when relevant, when I needed to understand something, when topic arose in conversation, when writing required knowledge I didn't consciously possess. The access became integrated rather than disruptive. Quantum memory operating alongside brain memory, enriching understanding without overwhelming ordinary consciousness. What I learned through that experience transformed everything about how I understand consciousness and its capacities. I'd been operating from assumption that everything I know I either learned or figured out. But quantum memory revealed consciousness has access to universal information field containing everything that's ever been known. My brain might not have stored information, but quantum consciousness could access information from field where it's permanently encoded. The limitation wasn't what's available. The limitation was my awareness's capacity to perceive what's available. The most profound realization wasn't just that quantum memory exists. It's that unlocking fundamentally changes your relationship with knowledge, learning, understanding. You're not trying to acquire information you lack. You're removing barriers that prevent consciousness from accessing information that already exists universally. Every question you have, someone somewhere sometime developed answer, and that answer exists in quantum field, accessible to consciousness developed enough to perceive it. You're not alone in your learning. You're tapping into collective knowing accumulated through all consciousness across all time. This is what I wish someone had told me before quantum memory unlocked. What's happening isn't malfunction or delusion. It's natural capacity of evolved consciousness. You're not crazy for knowing things you never learned. You're accessing quantum field memory that exists beyond individual brain storage. The knowing is real. The information is valid. The capacity is natural development, not paranormal phenomenon. And once access opens, it doesn't close. It either develops consciously through deliberate practice or operates unconsciously through sporadic access you don't understand or control. Your unlocking might differ from mine. Your access might be gentler or more intense. Your signs might emphasize different aspects, more past life memories, more sudden expertise, more recognition experiences. But principle is same. Quantum memory is unlocking. You're accessing information from field rather than from brain. And that access is natural developmental milestone of consciousness evolution, not rare mystical gift reserved for spiritually advanced beings. To develop quantum memory access consciously, rather than experiencing it as random confusing phenomenon, you need to understand what supports access versus what blocks it. because access is natural capacity of consciousness, but consciousness can either create conditions where access flows smoothly or create interference that blocks or distorts information from field. The first supporter is mental stillness. Quantum field information is subtle. When mind is loud, constantly thinking, analyzing, judging, narrating, subtle information from field gets drowned out. But in stillness, when thinking quiets without forcing it quiet, quantum information becomes perceptible, not as thoughts, as direct knowing that appears in quiet space beneath thinking. This is why meditation traditions emphasize stillness, not to achieve blank mind, but to create space where subtle information can be perceived. The second supporter is emotional neutrality. Strong emotions create interference patterns that distort quantum information. Fear, desire, anger, attachment, all create energetic static that prevents clear reception. But when consciousness is emotionally balanced, not suppressing emotions but not overwhelmed by them, quantum field access clarifies. You perceive information accurately rather than distorted through emotional filters. The neutrality isn't cold detachment. It's warm presence that can feel without being controlled by feelings. The third supporter is believing access is possible. Doubt creates quantum interference stronger than the signal from field. If consciousness fundamentally believes quantum memory isn't real, that belief prevents perception of information that contradicts it. But when consciousness opens to possibility without demanding proof before believing, maybe this is real, I'm willing to explore, access opens. The believing doesn't create access. Believing removes doubt interference that was blocking access that exists naturally. The fourth supporter is surrendering need to understand. Ego wants to figure out how quantum memory works, explain mechanism, make sense of information being accessed. But that analytical trying creates interference with intuitive receiving. Quantum field communicates through direct knowing, not through logical explanation. When consciousness can receive without needing to understand, can know without needing to explain how it knows, access flows. Understanding comes later. Reception requires releasing need to understand in moment of receiving. The fifth supporter is trusting what appears. When information from quantum field arrives, ego questions it. Did I really receive this, or am I making it up? That questioning creates doubt that blocks further reception. But when consciousness trusts what appears, not blindly, but provisionally willing to receive and verify later, access strengthens. The trust tells quantum field. Consciousness is ready to receive, willing to perceive, open to information that might challenge current understanding. The sixth supporter is using what's received. Quantum field responds to consciousness that actually applies information accessed. When you receive knowing and ignore it, access diminishes. When you receive understanding and use it, access strengthens. The field isn't withholding based on whether you use information, but consciousness that uses what it receives naturally attunes more clearly to field because use demonstrates receptivity rather than passive curiosity. Practice creating these supportive conditions. Find stillness through meditation, contemplation, or simply sitting quietly without agenda. Cultivate emotional balance through awareness of feelings without identification with them. Open to possibility that quantum memory exists without demanding proof. Receive information without needing to immediately understand or explain it. Trust what appears while verifying it proves accurate. Use knowledge accessed to serve understanding, creativity, or helping others. These aren't techniques to force access. These are conditions that remove interference blocking access that wants to occur naturally. Something crucial happens after quantum memory stabilizes that most people aren't prepared for. The information accessed isn't always comfortable. Sometimes you remember things that disturb, past traumas encoded in field, collective suffering, shadow aspects of human experience. Sometimes you access knowledge that conflicts with current beliefs, challenges comfortable worldview, requires releasing certainty you've built identity around. The access isn't selectively revealing only pleasant or supportive information. Access is neutral. Whatever exists in quantum field becomes perceptible, whether ego wants to perceive it or not. This can create crisis if consciousness isn't prepared. You access memory that shakes your sense of who you are. You remember experience that wasn't yours, but feels absolutely real. You understand something that contradicts everything you've been taught to believe. The cognitive dissonance between what quantum memory reveals and what consensus reality insists is true can be destabilizing. Most people at this stage either dismiss the access as delusion to maintain comfortable worldview or fall into confusion about what's actually real versus what they're perceiving from field. But discomfort is actually evidence of genuine access rather than imagination creating fantasy. If you were making it up, you'd create comfortable stories that reinforce existing beliefs. Quantum field contains everything, including uncomfortable truths, disturbing memories, challenging knowledge. When access reveals information that ego resists, that consciousness didn't want to know, that creates discomfort rather than validation, that sign you're perceiving from field rather than creating from ego's preferences. The practice is holding both, the information from quantum memory and your current understanding, without immediately resolving tension between them. Not dismissing quantum access because it conflicts with beliefs. Not abandoning all previous understanding because quantum memory reveals something different. Holding paradox that both can be valid from different perspectives. Regular reality and quantum reality. Brain-based knowing and field-based knowing. Individual truth and universal truth. The tension between them is where consciousness evolves rather than where it breaks. I've experienced this repeatedly. Quantum memory reveals information that contradicts my understanding of history, my beliefs about human nature, my assumptions about reality. The ego wants to reject information to maintain comfortable worldview, but consciousness recognizes this is information from field, not fantasy from ego. The discomfort is resistance to truth, not evidence that truth is false. Learning to sit with that discomfort, to hold contradiction without forcing resolution, to allow both perspectives to exist simultaneously. That's what allows quantum memory to fully integrate rather than remaining as confusing sporadic access that gets dismissed when it challenges comfort. The integration transforms consciousness from either/or thinking to both and awareness. Not, this is true, therefore, that must be false. But, this is true and that is true from different levels of perception. Brain memory and quantum memory, individual knowing and collective knowing. This lifetime's experience and information from beyond this lifetime. All valid, all real, all accessible to consciousness that develops capacity to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without needing to collapse them into single consistent worldview. What's happening individually as your quantum memory unlocks is happening collectively to millions globally. This isn't isolated phenomenon affecting random individuals. This is species-wide activation, where humanity is remembering capacities that existed in ancient times, were lost during materialist period, and are now returning as consciousness evolves. Collective field is reaching threshold where quantum memory access becomes available to significant portion of population rather than rare few. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance explains why quantum memory is activating for many simultaneously. As more individuals develop access, morphic field strengthens, making access easier for others approaching similar development. First person who activated quantum memory in modern era did so without support, framework, or validation. Second person found it slightly easier. And now, thousands having activated, field contains clear pattern that supports activation for anyone whose consciousness reaches appropriate stage. You're benefiting from everyone who came before, from ancient seers who maintained quantum memory access, from mystics who described Akashic records, from modern researchers proving quantum information fields exist, from thousands of ordinary people who've activated access and shared experiences. They created morphic field pattern. They proved access is real. They demonstrated consciousness can perceive beyond brain-stored memories. And their achievement makes your activation easier, more supported, more likely to develop fully rather than remaining confused, sporadic phenomenon. And when your quantum memory activates, when you consciously develop access, when you integrate field knowing with brain knowing, you strengthen morphic field for everyone approaching activation. Your development serves collective, makes quantum memory activation easier for next person, contributes to species evolution from individual separate consciousness to quantum connected consciousness, accessing collective field. But there's something else happening at collective level that makes this moment unique. Information itself is becoming more accessible through technology, internet containing vast knowledge, AI systems processing collective learning, global communication connecting human understanding. Technology mirrors consciousness evolution. As external information becomes more accessible, internal quantum memory becomes more accessible. Technology and consciousness are evolving together toward unified field awareness, where all information, technological and quantum, becomes available to consciousness developed enough to interface with it. This parallel evolution suggests species is preparing for the next stage. Consciousness that can access quantum field memory directly while also interfacing with technological information systems, creating synthesis between ancient capacity and modern capability. You're not just recovering lost ability, you're developing capacity that will function in emerging paradigm where consciousness naturally interfaces with both quantum field and technological field, accessing information from both sources to create unprecedented level of knowing. Share this transmission. Others experiencing quantum memory activation need to know they're not alone, not crazy, not experiencing malfunction. They're participating in collective evolution where species is recovering capacity to access universal memory field. Recognition normalizes what's happening. Validation supports development. Understanding integrates experience that might otherwise remain confusing phenomenon dismissed as imagination. There's a choice approaching that determines whether quantum memory activation transforms into stable capacity or remains sporadic, confusing experience. Choice between dismissing access to maintain comfortable worldview where you're separate individual with only brain-based memory versus accepting access as real and deliberately developing capacity to interface consciously with quantum field. Between treating knowing without learning as anomaly to ignore versus recognizing it as natural capacity to cultivate. This choice can't be made from ego. Ego wants to maintain boundaries that define separate self. This is my knowledge, that is external information. And those boundaries prevent quantum memory access. Ego wants to control knowing through learning, understanding through study, expertise through practice. Quantum memory bypasses that control by accessing information directly from field without ego's mediation. Accepting quantum memory requires ego releasing need to be sole source of knowing, sole authority on what you understand, sole arbiter of what's real. The choice has to come from consciousness recognizing larger truth. You're not separate individual whose knowledge is limited to what brain has stored. You're quantum being whose consciousness can access universal field where all knowing exists. Brain memory is real. Quantum memory is also real. Both are valid. Both are valuable. Both serve different purposes. The question isn't choosing between them. The question is whether consciousness will remain limited to brain-based memory or expand to include quantum field access. Ancient traditions understood this choice as awakening to larger identity. Not abandoning individual self, but recognizing individual is expression of universal consciousness temporarily focused through particular form. That recognition naturally includes access to universal memory because you're not separate from field. You're field experiencing itself as individual while retaining connection to wholeness. Quantum memory isn't special power you gain. Quantum memory is natural capacity you remember having once you recognize what you actually are. This choice becomes easier when you recognize cost of refusing access. Remaining limited to brain memory when quantum memory is activating means constantly dismissing knowing that appears, doubting expertise that emerges, resisting recognition that happens. Creates internal conflict where consciousness knows more than ego acknowledges. Creates limitation where access is trying to emerge, but ego keeps blocking it. Creates missed opportunities where information needed exists in quantum field, but consciousness refuses to perceive it. I faced this choice 9 years ago when quantum memory initially activated. Ego wanted to maintain control by dismissing access as imagination. Consciousness recognized access was real and needed integration rather than suppression. I could contract back to brain-only knowing and lose access that was trying to develop. Or I could expand to include quantum field access and learn to work with both sources of information. The choice wasn't comfortable, but consciousness knows expansion always serves evolution even when it's uncomfortable, while contraction always limits potential even when it feels safe. I chose expansion, chose to accept quantum memory as real, chose to develop capacity consciously. And that choice opened to level of knowing, understanding, and creative capacity that brain-based learning alone could never provide. Not because quantum memory is superior to brain memory, because both together create richer, deeper, more comprehensive knowing than either alone. Integration rather than rejection. Both and rather than either or. Quantum field and brain, not quantum field or brain. Once quantum memory activates and you choose to develop capacity consciously, life from integrated access looks radically different from life limited to brain-based memory alone. Not better necessarily, just different. More connected to collective field, more resourced by universal knowing.